You are tuned to the Indraprastha channel of Akashvani. Radio means different things to different people, especially to the generation that was born during peak radio days. The wave of TV, internet tried to shook basis of radio, but radio still remains the most intimate medium. On World Radio Day, we now bring you a talk by former Ambassador IFS Gitesh Sarma, an IFS officer of 1986 batch, recollecting his fond memories with radio listening intertwined with memories of his father and childhood days.
Mention radio and it brings back happy memories of a bygone era. Among my earliest memories is my late father sitting in his favorite chair in the 1960s, a newspaper in hand and listening to the news on the radio. Of course, the picture becomes more complete with piping hot South Indian filter coffee served in a steel tumbler and bowl. In those days, the box-like radio was more or less permanently fixed to the electric socket on the wall. The machine took a few minutes to boot up while we impatiently waited by its side. I must have been around 5 years old and feared that miniature people were inside radio sets. I used to gingerly inspect the back of the radio when no one was around, and the brightly lit walls inside were fascinating. Over time, I learned to tune the radio by moving a thread across the screen with a rotary dial till it played something pleasing to the ear. The 1970s was perhaps a defining moment for radios in India. By this time, I was at a boarding school in Hazaribagh town in what is now Jharkhand state. In the late evenings, we gathered around the Soul radio and tuned past static and other challenges to listen to Hindi film music. The term Bollywood became more popular much later. Binaka Geetmala on Radio Ceylon was a favorite, and Amin Sayani with his magical voice modulation was its memorable host. I had read somewhere that there was a time when All India Radio, AIR, banned film music in the early 1950s after the in-charge minister decided it was vulgar. I was glad also to read that AIR started Vivid Bharati in 1957, catering to popular demand for such entertainment. Broadcasters, to remain relevant, need to respond to changing tastes. Hazaribagh town is about 60 kilometers from Jumri Tilaiya. This town gained fame because of its quaint name, and since many of its inhabitants spent their free time sending radio requests to Radio Ceylon and Vivid Bharati on AIR. Even recently, songs have been composed centered on the funny-sounding name of Jumri Tilaiya. We did not have television or the internet everywhere in India in the 1970s. I remember the days at boarding school when we struggled with the radio to catch the news. I looked forward to my turn each day to read the lone copy of the newspaper and took my time digesting every word. But during the day, I had to supplement this with the news updates on the radio. This is how we followed the Apollo moon landings, the 1971 Bangladesh War, and other landmark moments. This is how we followed the Apollo moon landings, the 1971 Bangladesh War, and other landmark moments. Talking of the year 1971, the Ajit Wadekar captained Indian cricket team won over the mighty West Indies playing in the Caribbean. The same year, India beat England in a test series. I recall crowding around a compact transistor radio and listening to the running commentary on the last moments of the Oval Test as India headed to victory. Those with pocket radios were popular in offices, buses and everywhere because cricket fans depended on them for the latest score. In the late 1970s, I regularly listened to AIR's Urdu service. I had also been wanting to improve my spoken Urdu. Those lessons helped me enjoy life and conduct my business in Urdu-speaking regions. I recall AIR's FM radio appearing in India in the early 1980s. My father was then associated with AIR somehow and was privileged to listen to FM sound for the first time in what must have been test broadcasts. This was when broadcasting changed in India and would never be the same again. TV had gone color, and satellites and other forms of connectivity made it possible to watch TV almost anywhere in India. As I grew and started a career, my transistor radio gave way to a 2-in-1 radio plus cassette recorder for as long as I could. But over time, it became more TV than radio. While serving abroad in the 1990s in a country that no longer exists, a world radio receiver became my prized possession. It was fun to tune in to radio stations broadcasting from distant locations. I would listen to them late at night and imagine life in those countries. Sometime around 1980, I participated in a radio quiz, and the experience was memorable. The show was conducted by a young lady who is today one of India's leading lawyers. The first time I had access to the internet was in 1995, and today there is a flood of information and instant news, including through social media. I am amazed at the spread of the internet and the information revolution in the 21st century. Newspapers and entertainment are a split second away from our cell phones. But I have lived almost half of my life without the internet. The constant barrage of information through the internet and TV leaves one exhausted and struggling to make sense of all the information. Around 4 years ago, I returned to the radio after several years. It was interesting to note that most radio channels in India were now on FM rather than medium wave. I am happy to start the day with AIR news at 8 a.m. even before I have touched the newspapers. I can do my other tasks with the transistor playing FM music in the background. In short, I feel better informed and certainly much lighter. Frankly, I missed all these years AIR's famous signature tune composed in 1936 by the Jewish refugee to India, Walter Kaufmann. Vivid Bharati was always the complete package with entertainment, news, and catchy commercial jingles. I am happy to note that in 2011, UNESCO declared 13 February as World Radio Day. I read on a UN website that radio is a powerful medium for celebrating humanity in all its diversity and constitutes a platform for democratic discourse. The radio, in other words, remains relevant. Radios, for instance, are a must in disaster-prone areas when other forms of communication are difficult. I presented a crank radio to a close relative who had to endure hours of power cuts and load shedding, and he greatly appreciated the gift. Operating a crank charges the battery of this emergency radio. Some versions have an inbuilt flashlight and mobile charger. Let us celebrate World Radio Day enthusiastically on 13 February 2024. Let us remember to convey our gratitude and best wishes to the staff of AIR and other friendly radio stations around the world on this happy occasion.
That was Ambassador and IFS officer of 1986 batch recounting his memories of radio listenership. This broadcast came to you over Indraprastha channel of Akashvani. Please stay tuned in for the next broadcast.